Today's a special day for me. It's not only Cyber Monday, a busy day for Amazon, but I'm very excited to hear it's the first day of a new commission. Jean-Claude Juncker has rode out of town at the weekend, and 5 years ago I was involved in a project that we called LuxLeaks, which is a leak of tax rulings from Luxembourg. Many tax rulings, mainly from produced by PricewaterhouseCoopers for big multinationals, including Amazon. And of course, the Luxembourg tax regime was made in the image of Jean-Claude Juncker, who had previously served as Prime Minister of Luxembourg. And we published that at the beginning of his commission. And he said that our questions were offensive, and that there was definitely no profit shifting in Luxembourg at all, particularly with Amazon, which he had been very intimately involved in attracting to Luxembourg. And to give you just a little bit of an example, as to a clue as to Juncker's deep involvement in attracting Amazon to Luxembourg, winding the clock right back to 2004 when they first made the decision. Their head of tax, who secured the secret tax ruling that has since been the subject of an EU state aid case and an award of €250 million. Well, the head of tax at Amazon was a chap called Bob Comfort, and he got on particularly well with Juncker, and he later said in interviews what an obliging chap he was. And Bob, after he secured this amazing secret deal with Juncker's tax authorities in the Netherlands, in Luxembourg, he zipped off back to the States, and he soon retired afterwards, and he was given this extraordinary diplomatic title of the Honorary Consul for Luxembourg in the Seattle region. Now, I don't know how busy a role that is, given the size of Luxembourg, and I don't know what their diaspora is in the Seattle region, but it seems to me that stinks to high heaven. Anyway, that's enough from me. I'm going to pass the mic on now, and perhaps as time's pressing for you, you could start by giving us the European perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this invitation, and also for your patience right now, because I just learned normally you should have had right now your coffee break, and we are going on, so hopefully it's not too much to go straight to the next issue to debate right now with you. My name is Regner, and I'm a member of the European Parliament already for some while, and I was also a member in the diverse committees, special committees we had on LuxLeaks, Panama Papers, the follow-up, all those committees. One message now, it's quite calm. Why? We need another tax committee that is really dealing with the issue, dealing with the digitax, dealing with the long-term solution we need for Amazon and Co. Not only Amazon, but all the others as well. I'm one of those fighting that we give up unanimity on all tax issues. That is really something that is on the break, so I don't want to do around. We need this special committee, and we need you, because when there is pressure of the trade unions, when there is pressure of these fantastic investigative journalists, we have the spotlight on the issue. When there is no spotlight on the issue, people are shrugging the shoulders and don't dig deeper because it's taxes and it's getting technical, and people sometimes say, oh no, it's too complicated. Last week, I don't want to say too much in the introductory round because I think we would like to have a debate on that issue, but last week the Finnish presidency was really trying the best, in order to push the issue, had on the agenda public country-by-country reporting, so more transparency. This is what we had already voted on in the last legislative period, and what happens, one single member country. It was one single member country more, and we would have really had a big change to the better. And then you just look, who is this alliance? who doesn't want to have more transparency on all those taxes not paid by Amazon. I always have to look on my hand because all these figures are so incredible. Normally one country can't even believe that. When you just think of this 129 million rebate for Amazon just in the last year, and this all against the background that they just before all just simply paid 3% instead of 21% in the US. So one country more and we would have been successful, and this is the alliance of Luxembourg as mentioned, but of course not only, of Malta, of Ireland, also Austria. Unfortunately the Germans always on the break. So just simply when you dig a little bit deeper, all those countries, they are just, they have something to hide. They give tax, not only goodies, they give it just an enormous piece of the cake that everybody of the workers deserves to be treated well. And insofar we just have to jointly fight on this issue. And I just would like to remind of all those directives at stake. So there are means. We have a lot of means we could push, and therefore a big thank you to all those journalists who have been so fantastic. And now at least we have the whistleblowers directive, which hopefully also back your courage.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. And now we're going to turn to, I think sometimes this debate can feel quite disjointed, and there's certainly a lot of anger in Europe, but it's sometimes helpful to put together the perspectives we have, and this doesn't always happen, with the perspectives as they are in the States, and there's no better person to go to for that than Matt, who is regularly giving an authoritative view in the US media on this topic.
Thanks. So I've been working on taxes for 20 years in the States, and Amazon has been a regular feature in the background of the tax avoidance landscape for pretty much this entire time. And while some of the things I'm going to say here may sound somewhat irrelevant, I don't think they are. And the reason I say this is that these strategies I've seen Amazon pursue over the last 2 decades of tax avoidance and of rationalizing their tax avoidance as important are broadly similar to what I see Amazon and other companies doing at the national and now at the international level. And I think the policy solutions, the media solutions, the communication solutions that we reach for in trying to deal with international tax avoidance going forward can draw heavily on the U.S. experience and on the U.S. experience with Amazon in particular. So a couple of quick anecdotes. When Amazon was founded in 1994, it was founded for tax purposes, for tax avoidance purposes. I'll read this to you because it remains an endlessly entertaining quote, and I think Jeff Bezos should be punished for saying this publicly until the end of time. He's talking about why they were founded in Washington State for tax purposes, and it's because of a loophole in our tax laws that says you don't have to collect sales taxes, general sales taxes on internet-based transactions and mail order transactions unless you have a physical presence in the state. He calls it the small state rule. The idea is that our headquarters should be someplace where we won't have to collect a lot of sales tax because we don't have a lot of customers there. And the great quote is admitting that he'd rather have been in California. We thought about the Bay Area, which is the single best source of technical talent, but it didn't pass the small state test. I even investigated whether we could set up Amazon.com on an Indian reservation near San Francisco. This way we could have access to talent without all the tax consequences. Unfortunately, the government thought of that first. Really a classic quote both in its orientation towards government and towards taxes. The first month I was working on tax policy was the summer of 1998 when the U.S. Senate had hearings on internet taxation. And ostensibly the idea was to protect this industry from excessive taxation. We didn't want to tax the internet into the ground. That's how our political culture works. But even then, I listened to the hearings and I heard a guy, a senator from Arkansas named Dale Lumbers, who said, talks about this company called Amazon Books. Said they're taking advantage of the tax system, they're not collecting sales tax on their transactions. It's pretty unfair, and he basically said, in an Arkansas way, that if this wasn't addressed, sales taxes would collapse in the next 20 years. He was saying it because his biggest constituent was Walmart, that does have a physical presence and already had to collect sales taxes. But still, he said it in a crypto mayor's a little bit. Fast forward 10 years, in 2011, Amazon is now collecting sales tax in 4 states. Those happen to be the four states in which they had a warehouse or an HQ. It also excluded 7 or 8 states where they did have a physical presence and were basically denying it for purposes of taxes. The South Carolina governor promised Amazon a set of tax breaks valued at $33 million if they would put a warehouse in South Carolina. Amazon shakes a hand with the governor, metaphorically agrees to do it, starts building. The governor loses an election. The legislature comes back and says, we don't want to do this. In particular, we really dislike the notion that we would give you one component of this, which is a sales tax exemption for the next 5 years. You have a physical presence, you're supposed to be collecting sales tax. They wanted to get a 5-year exemption for it. When the legislature said the first thing about not doing this, Amazon stopped construction on the warehouse. They stopped advertising for the jobs they had been hiring for in that location. And that got the attention of the lawmakers who promptly gave them the 5-year tax holiday. During the ensuing 5 years, I think it's important to recognize this is 2012 to 2017, a period during which internet retail was already predominant, and during which small brick and mortar companies were struggling to hold on. You can imagine what it's like to be a business leader for one of these other companies in 2013 in South Carolina, knowing that you're facing 4 more years of not being able to compete with Amazon. This is what they do. This is the rule rather than the exception in how Amazon has negotiated with governments. So what do you draw from this? I'm not even going to mention HPQ, which I imagine has already been discussed, but I can talk about that as well. What you draw from this is a couple of things. One, I've never seen a company, in my experience, for whom profit maximization has been more about tax avoidance than is the case with Amazon. It's central to their competitive advantage, always has been. But they are, while they are different from many other companies in this one critical way, they are similar in a couple other ways. One is that its leaders will look you in the eye if you're an elected official and make promises or make threats that are designed to make you believe that if they don't get tax breaks, they will walk away. They don't often do it. And in fact, companies more broadly rarely do it. And in fact, the more worrisome complication is that maybe you give them the tax breaks and then walk away anyway. But making threats to extract tax advantages with the implicit or even explicit statement that without these tax breaks we just can't make it work is something these companies, and Amazon in particular, have done for decades. The second thing is that bail bumpers was, in this one occasion, at least right. When you make these tax giveaways part of the way you structure your tax system, when you let them exist and fester and affect the rest of the tax system, there is a hidden cost that you as a policymaker don't have to measure, but that is very real, and it's a long-term cost. The erosion of the tax base, the erosion of the state and nation's, the EU's ability to pay for needed public services. When you don't have a tax system, you do not have the public investments that your citizens need and require. The reason this has been allowed to fester in the U.S. is because policymakers have shown an unwillingness, I'm magnetic or something, have shown have shown a regrettable willingness to focus only on the tax side of the equation and not to think about the impact of fiscal policy on spending. Fiscal policy is a two-sided coin, and Amazon and other companies do their best to make us think that it only has one side, that it's all about the local taxes. And so the overarching lesson, I think, is we need to think about both sides of the coin.
Thank you very much, Matt. That's a very interesting perspective. I think in Europe, sometimes we hear these stories about what Amazon did to jump around the small state solution it looked for. In America, it felt quite alien because sales tax works differently. In Europe, we have VAT and it's collected across the member states. But there is massive VAT avoidance on Amazon in every country. There are sellers, thousands and thousands of sellers dominating many product categories on Amazon who are not based in Europe. They import their products, but even into Amazon's own warehouses, and Amazon will fulfill them, and they're not paying VAT. They're lying about what their products are when they come in across borders. In many ways, that dwarfs the amount of revenue lost to corporate income tax avoidance. We're now going to get a few of some. Jason's going to give it, who's at the other side of the world, Australia's. There's some really interesting things going on there in terms of how they're taking on the big corporations and holding them to account, particularly the digital corporations. And Jason's got a very interesting international perspective as well. Jason.
Hello. Okay. All right. I'm going to try to keep my remarks pretty brief if I can, and see if I can get everybody excited about tax. I know it's been a long day, but it's a thrilling topic, and I'm going to convince you of that now. I just want to start off by putting tax in context, and I think that there's no clearer example of corporate power and abuse when an Amazon worker pays more in income tax in the United States than the company does in a year. An Amazon worker working in a fulfillment center, relying on public assistance to pay bills, to pay the rent, to put food on the table for the family, pays more income tax than Amazon, controlled by Jeff Bezos, one of the richest men in the world. That is a pretty clear and shocking example of corporate power and corporate abuse. And the fact that national governments, regional governments, and international bodies haven't done enough to address that issue is what makes Trump and Brexit and other populist interventions thrive, because people see that, people are aware that that's going on, and it still goes on and still perpetuates it, and we need to do more to change that situation. I think it's already been mentioned that obviously tax is fundamental to funding the public services that we need and to ending or reducing inequality that's going in the wrong direction at this moment. And we need all companies to pay their fair share. Amazon is one of the most aggressive global tax dodgers that there is. There was a story that came out in the Guardian today that sort of ranked them as the worst tax avoider of the big 6 tech companies. So there's tough competition there, but Amazon wins once again. The other thing too, I think it's worth mentioning that the system is rigged. I think that there are some opportunities to fix it, and there's some positive developments there. But just one example of how the system is so rigged. The IRS, the tax authority in the United States, took Amazon to court for shifting profits to Luxembourg. And sadly, this year, the courts in the United States ruled that profit shifting out of Luxembourg was legal. So that tells you that the system really needs to change. There are some positive developments in terms of how that system is looking to change. Public country-by-country reporting has been mentioned. France, as was discussed previously, has established a digital tax. There's about at least half a dozen European countries that are also either have implemented or are implementing digital taxes, and that's a tax on revenue. You can't shift revenue. You can shift profit very easily, but you can't shift revenue. And there are active discussions now at the OECD level around unitary taxation to tax companies as a whole to eliminate the possibility of profit shifting. So we've recently, just to give you a couple examples, we've just looked at Amazon's tax payments in Australia. And I'll have to say that in Australia, they probably pay more tax on a per revenue basis than they do pretty much anywhere in the world. But they're still doing a pretty damn good job of shifting profits out of Australia. So they had, in 2018, they had $1 billion Australian dollars in revenue, and pay $20 million in tax. That's a pretty low tax rate there. They are paying the sales tax in Australia because before they came in a big way. Australia changed the rules, and New Zealand and other countries have followed that example to make sure that they collect GST, the sales tax on Amazon sales. Sorry, it's 4 a.m. in Sydney. I'm losing you a little bit here. I think I'll just conclude with that.
Okay, I mean it's a pretty northern hemisphere perspective, perhaps, but I think with that you don't often get the opportunity to hear such global viewpoints on this topic. I'll ask if there's any questions from the audience. Go ahead.
Okay, I was just checking my mails, and I learned that the United States Trade Representative is starting an investigation of the French digital tax. So, and there were comments from the industry associations that like maybe it's a better idea instead of like tariffs, we should leave this issue to OECD and see what OECD discussions will end up, and like how they will come up with a new policy there. So I want to ask about that. First of all, the French digital tax, and then the OECD discussions, because I thought it's very timely that that investigation is coming now, and the industry and industry associations are saying that, oh, this is really great for us because we don't want other countries to implement digital tax to our companies.
I think it's fantastic that the French did that move and that a number of other countries are following through. Obviously, we need coordinated EU-wide movement and coordinated global movement, but that's not going to happen until it's forced to happen by other countries taking national measures. So I think it's a very positive step forward.
Yes. So somehow, of course, we should act at the national level, at the European level, and of course at the global level. And those who are always telling, okay, at the global level something has to be done in order to be effective, and therefore leave out the European or national perspective, so somehow they are just simply trying to find an excuse of doing nothing. So the French example is a good example, and therefore again, what is needed, and already, I mean, we asked the commissioners in the hearing, so somehow listening very carefully, expecting to go on with that at the European level. And that's what the task is that has to be done by the new commission that started the work, so we are not even waiting, we are eagerly asking them to present as soon as possible the proposal.
A couple things that I'd quickly add. One is that sometimes the lousy is the ally of the good. While the French tax is not what I would have designed, there's no question that it's opened the door, it's gotten the attention of the United States. At any time during the first 20 years of Amazon's existence in the United States, Congress could have enacted a national solution to the tax problem. They chose not to. They left it to the states. And when in 2008-ish, states like New York and California started enacting their own taxes, they were called Amazon laws because everyone knew Amazon was the biggest tax avoider. That's what prompted the move toward a more national solution. Imperfect subnational or state-specific tax remedies are absolutely the thing that can get these multinational movements, which I would agree are exactly what we need in the end, can get these things going. So I applaud the French tax in particular for that, for getting the attention of the U.S. Trade Representative and implicitly of the President.
I think there's another question.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So my name is Uli Tourneau. So just two quick questions, I guess. Number one, What would country reporting add in terms of transparency? And the reason why I ask is that in the last few weeks I've been doing research on national corporate registries. So when you look at the different sort of Amazon subsidiaries in Germany, in the UK, you can get sort of a picture of the country's tax payments, its operations. So what is country by country reporting going to add? And secondly, on this kind of concept, I guess, that you should be paying tax, corporate income tax on earnings before taxes, and that if you're not profitable, from what my limited understanding is that if you're not making a profit, you shouldn't be paying taxes, because Amazon's second largest employment footprint after the US is in India with 60,000 employees, and the company hasn't been, like, theoretically, it hasn't been profitable on its income statements, so it hasn't been declaring tax payments on its income statement. So I just wonder if you think that's fair and if that should change. Thank you.
I'm going to start with India. I'm just going to give you another example. I've been looking at a named German multinational company that operates in India, and again, India is a major production unit for it. The company in India runs, for the last 4 years, averages a negative profit margin of about 6%. A company doesn't continue to run with an actual negative profit margin of 6%. These are concocted numbers, and the profits have been shifted elsewhere. And in the case of India, this company has the same structure as Amazon, in which its Indian operation is completely owned through Singapore, which is the tax haven, it's the Luxembourg of the Asia-Pacific region. And that Singapore company is in turn owned in Luxembourg. So I think Amazon sort of shifting of profits at the national level is just part of its global tax strategy and part of what most multinationals do. Amazon just pursues it with a little bit more vigor than everybody else. And just in terms of country by country reporting, I want to make a quick plug. This week, the Global Reporting Initiative is going to formally announce a new standard for public country by country reporting, which I think is a superior standard to the OECD's. I won't get into the weeds on this, but I think it makes a huge difference in driving transparency. And transparency is not the solution, as was discussed in earlier panels, but it does help move things in the right direction. It does make sure that people can point out what's going on. The GRI standards are public. 3/4 of major multinationals use GRI standards for sustainability reporting already. So if a company doesn't begin to do the tax reporting standards, what are they hiding? And with Amazon, as has been discussed earlier, is a major provider of services to governments worldwide, and I think governments really need to ensure that any company getting government contracts is abiding by those GRI standards, which include the public country-by-country reporting. Those standards not only include tax paid on the government level, but they also include reporting on actual, real economics at the national level, and that's a major difference. How many workers do you have in that country? What's your revenue in that country? What's your real economic activity? Not how much money did you ship to Luxembourg or some other tax haven.
Thanks. Americanization did a study a couple of years ago looking at where U.S. companies were reporting their profits. And we found that U.S. multinationals had reported something like $50 billion of income in the Cayman Islands. The problem with this is the entire Cayman Islands economy is $4 billion, meaning that something like 90+% of all the income they were reporting there was an accounting fiction. That report did not name names. It didn't identify a single company that had stuff in the Caymans or that was pretending they had it in the Caymans, because we couldn't. Country by country reporting accomplishes that. We know from the rare examples when companies actually fess up to this stuff. There's a shoe company called Skechers, where you can look at their 10K, their report, and find out the fraction of their income that is in Jersey, which is rocks mostly. There are people who live there, but they don't produce things there, and their income comes from there. Knowing that about specific companies is incredibly powerful, captures the public and the media's and lawmakers' imagination in a way that no stack of dry statistics about GDP in the Cayman Islands ever can. It's invaluable.
In order to change the world, in order to change the situation, people need to know what's happening. So I mean, that's the first step. And those figures we have, I mean, of course, we could even improve that, which figures should be published. What figures do we have? We have the revenues, we have, for example, how many employees. Then you see, okay, only 6 out of 150 working in Austria, for example, to refer to my country, are in normal contracts. All others are whatever atypical ones. So somehow, this is the question: what do shareholders finally say on that? What do all the stakeholders say on that? So somehow, public CBCR can really change, and it hasn't mentioned so far, but for me it's also important. It has an enormous effect also on the role of developing countries. So what is shifted away from one country to the other, and then just we can start to do all the other things with the common consolidated corporate tax and all the other things that have to be done, including also non-financial reporting. So it makes a huge difference. And I think for all of us here on the podium, more or less the most important message with this whole thing is we're talking on Amazon being so incredibly powerful. I mean, we are living in democracies, and we should use our democratic tools to go to the elections. If an enterprise is having so much power, so somehow deciding and proposing on taxes, on labor law, more or less, then something is completely going wrong. So it's the question how to get back more or less the power to those democratically elected institutions, even if we are criticizing them a lot, but to get all this back. Amazon is far too big for everything.
Any other questions? There is one.
Bertie Smith from SDA in Australia. Well, one comment and one question. Jason mentioned we changed our tax laws. The day we changed our tax laws, Amazon geo-blocked Australians from buying from Amazon for 4 months. But the lesson out of that was that Amazon lifted the geo-block the day before Black Friday because having Australians as customers was more important than the tax issue. So I suppose one lesson is regulators should hold their nerve and don't be afraid of Amazon in that respect. Then the second more important question is, what is the ideal Amazon tax to capture them?
I think the ideal tax is a global unitary tax that at a minimum taxation level that taxes all multinationals and then distributes that profits according to a fair and reasonable formula based on employees, based on sales, and based on a range of real economic factors. I mean, that's ultimately where we need to go. Amazon has actually commented that it's in favor of these OECD discussions about unitary tax. So the scary situation is that we need to make political pressure to make sure that those reforms, those discussions that are going on now at the OECD level actually result in changes that are substantive and real. I think until we have that taxation of multinationals as a whole entity, instead of this fiction of allotting profits to where they're not taxed at all, based on using the loopholes in the existing system, we're going to continue to have these problems. Transfer pricing exists under the current system, and the only way to stop it is to change the global system. As we heard from Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party in the UK has announced that it's moving forward, if elected, with a unitary tax system on multinationals. And I think, again, as we discussed earlier, having countries take that step on their own helps to move the global level. And ultimately, we need global change, but continuing to go down that path. In Australia, in particular, there has been discussions under the Conservative government of a digital tax before. They backed away from it. And I think we need to re-raise that discussion in Australia about moving forward as a short-term measure on a tax on revenue.
Two quick things. One, on the unitary tax, I think that's a sensible approach. The main thing is that we need to look for the weakest link. In a global tax system, it's only as good as the weakest link, and as long as zero is available, companies will seek that out. It's true whether the U.S. tax rate is 35% as it was a couple years ago, or 21% as it is now. The continued availability of zero is what's draining our corporate tax revenues at this time. The second thing I'd say is that, I think your sentiment is correct that you have to treat the threats, the promises of these folks with a grain of salt. A mature company that has a strategic plan that is built for the long run does not make its decisions based on tax rates, tax levels. And if you do, you don't have a plan. In the long run, if you don't have, if there's not a demand for products, no amount of tax incentives can encourage you to make more. That's why, right now, U.S. policymakers are sitting around looking at the smoldering records of the 2017 tax cut and asking, why didn't it create more capital investment? Why didn't it create more jobs? It's because taxes don't do that. And so, yeah, I think I would wholeheartedly applaud the skepticism in the question.
So I'm very brief right now because unfortunately I have to leave already because of chairing a committee in the European Parliament right now. I simply would like to say we are stronger and we can do that far better when we, as those being in the European Union, are agreeing that we have to do that jointly. And sometimes everybody says, oh, but I can't, I'm Irish, and so somehow this is sort of in our national DNA. No, we can only do that jointly, and the trade union movement is an important and absolutely important partner. So when you just see, looking at the sort of dumping that is existing by Amazon, tax dodging on the one side, but also always saying, okay, we're creating jobs, and at the same time, 2 jobs are destroyed when 1 job is created. So what sort of job is more or less happening then? We need the trade union, and we absolutely, and this is somehow what I never will cease to fight for, to do that at the European Union level. From my point of view, at the moment, it's a little bit too silent. Of course, there are many other problems that are existing, but we have to do that jointly at the level of the European Union.
I just want to add another to this discussion, voice from Eastern Europe again. In Poland, there's more than 20,000 workers, but there's no Amazon Poland. So if we tax, if we use national tax, they will be not forced to pay taxes, because all we do is to send boxes to Germany, and they're sold through Amazon DE. So I mean, maybe the taxation within national country wouldn't be enough, because with cheap labor in Poland, who only works for German market, then we something need more than national taxation in a national country. That's just to add this. So in Poland there's special economical zones where all the companies they don't pay any taxes, but Amazon doesn't need it because they claim they don't sell in Poland at all. They just employ 20,000 workers and have a property of 1,000 euro Amazon fulfillment in Poland. That's the reality.
I wasn't aware of that.
Just, I mean, that's why we need a unitary taxation system that taxes them globally and allocates money based on where workers are as well as where sales are made. And the current OECD proposal doesn't do that. It's solely based on sales, and that's completely unfair because lots of countries like Poland, in your example, would be losing out. And so India has been the country that has championed the sort of most progressive model that takes into account employees as well as sales and other factors in terms of how profits would be distributed from a global unitary tax. And just one thing to add to, I think that, I don't know if this was mentioned before, but Amazon's facing a charge of 250 million euros from the European Commission for tax avoidance, and obviously it's appealed that, but it'd be nice to claw back 250 million euros from greedy Amazon.
Any more? Any other thoughts? Yes.
Very short one. Because
Just
actually,
wait.
you mentioned that Australia changed the law about tax because of Amazon, but can you clarify what they exactly changed? Because probably not all of us know it.
Sure. What they did is they made sure that the GST, the sales tax, applied on all sales of Amazon in Australia. And as Brother Bernie pointed out, the Amazon basically just pulled a strike on Australia and pulled out of Australia temporarily, came back because they were losing the money of the market there. But that's essentially, and New Zealand followed suit, and other countries have since followed suit, so that all sales that Amazon does in Australia are now subject to sales tax, and that's, so it was called Amazon tax when it was passed, but it applies to all online sales as well.
There's another question. Is there a mic in the middle? Hang on.
Hello, Marita Bigatel from Oxfam, Germany. I learned last weekend that at the World Trade Organization there is a plurilateral negotiation on e-commerce, and I was wondering if you deal with it and if you see any implications in terms of taxation of digital cooperation. That's the one. And the second is that I learned that there is a permanent moratorium, if you like, for e-transmissions, which benefit Amazon, YouTube, Apple, and Netflix, for example. And I was wondering, I mean, it's obviously also meant to not to pay taxes or import duties. If this is really how relevant it is, because it is obviously just meant for the US companies, and the US is pleading for renewing this kind of moratorium next year, and there is little knowledge about it. So I was just wondering if this is something you are aware about, and how important it might be.
I'm not familiar with the details of that. I mean, I think I understand why the U.S. would support the moratorium, because our position, our government's position, I should say, has been that if we can't have it, nobody else can, and yet we don't have the political will to take it. So the moratoriums of that sort, if the idea is that e-commerce is sort of this fragile flower that can't be damaged by the foul hands of tax policy, is not a new thing. It's not a new argument. It's one that's been made absurdly for over a quarter century, and certainly there shouldn't be any illusion that this is an area in which taxes could have an especially harmful effects.
I don't have any specific knowledge of those WTO discussions, but just to make a general comment that the tax games that Amazon is playing weren't derived by the tech industry. They were done by big oil companies from decades ago. Amazon has just perfected them and refined them, and it's a lot easier to deal with intellectual property issues and royalty payments when you're dealing with e-commerce issues versus a solid product. And the tricks that they've been busted for and been caught out by the courts in the US and by the European Commission, and what they're doing in Australia is still going on today. I mean, it's just intellectual property lives in Luxembourg. I mean, they try to pretend that it's very complicated, but at the end of the day, it's pretty damn simple, right? You just shifted your profits to where they're not taxed at all, and don't pay taxes where you make your money. And so we obviously need collective action to address that and stop that.
That pretty much sums it up. I think we'll finish there. Thank you very much. Round of applause for the panel.